Hello and welcome to this Play Better Chess video. So this is another chess tips to improve your game, part 2. Maybe I'll do a few more of these videos, but in this series, I'll go over chess games of the greatest players and point out tips on what they're doing and see how you can use these tactics and strategies and everything in your own games. In this game, this is from 2024, and we have Magnus Carlsen, who is the highest rated player in the world right now and a former world chess champion, playing against Viswanathan Anand, a former world chess champion. Like I said, that's the 2024 game. It was a 15-minute rapid game. And in this, it looks like Carlsen, who had white, had an even game in the beginning. Then he gains a slight edge before giving it up. And then in the second half of the game, he just gets an advantage until he wins. He played at a 92.4% accuracy rating, versus 81.2 by Anand. And Carlsen had 3 great moves. Anand had 1. And for the bad moves, let's see. 1 inaccuracy by Carlsen, 3 by his opponent, 1 mistake, and 4 mistakes by Anand. Maybe Anand had an off day in this game because he played at a 2300 level. When he is like a 2700 player, and Carlsen played at 2850. All right, so this isn't a very long game. It's an Evans Gambit in the Italian game. So let's take a look. I'll turn on the analysis here, and the game begins with e4. As I mentioned, for you beginners out there, I've mentioned this in the past, e4 is a good way to start because e4 openings tend usually to open up a little bit more and give you more room for your pieces to maneuver, whereas d4 is more of a strategic game and leads to more closed positions, and that might be harder to deal with until you learn more strategy. Which is a good tip. Study chess strategy in videos or books or wherever. Also tactics. Definitely try and do some regular tactics study daily, and play daily if you can, and go over your games on your own first and then with a computer. So e4, e5 is how this game started out. And then we have knight to f3. A good move, attacking the center, attacking this unprotected pawn. So Anand brings a knight out, and usually it's good to bring your knights out early and before your bishops, because it gives you time to see where best to place your bishops. Now, you don't have to bring both knights out first. You can, but here the knight is brought out and then the bishop. And you want to try and pick moves that have multiple purposes. So what did this bishop move do? Well, it controls a valuable central square here. And it also attacks up this diagonal, hitting this f7 pawn, which is only protected by the king. So this is usually a weak spot on both sides of the board, this f2 pawn as well. So in these open e4, e5 games, a lot of times you can target these weak f pawns. So that's a tip that you can use in your own games. All right, so we have an Italian game here with bishop to c4. And also with this bishop move, the king is ready to castle to safety, and that also brings the rook out towards the center, where it'll be a little bit stronger. So Anand brings his bishop out as well. And we continue with the Evans Gambit. Now, what is a gambit for you beginners that have no idea? Well, a gambit is where you give something up in order to get something in return. Usually it's a pawn. You give up this pawn here, and if the gambit is accepted, which it is in the game, it pulls the bishop down here. White goes behind in material. So one thing you have to watch out if you're playing a gambit, you're behind in material, so you want to avoid trading pieces. You want to trade pawns if you can, and you want to use your pieces to try and attack before material is traded down and you're just behind in the end game. With that bishop on b4, this is the idea behind the Evans Gambit. The bishop is pulled to b4 where the c-pawn can push forward, chasing the bishop back, and then in the future you can play the pawn to d4 and it'll be backed up by this pawn on c3. Now the reason the king castled first is because if we go back, with the king here, once this pawn moves, there'll be a pin along this diagonal aimed at the king and pinning this c-pawn. So in order to get rid of that, Carlsen castles his king to safety. His rook is in a better position. His opponent plays a mistake here. Now, why is this a mistake? Well, a general tip is not to bring your queen out too early. Because one, the queen can become a target of attack and be chased around the board, and then you have to retreat and run while other pieces are moving forward. Also, this might not be the best place for the queen. So it looks like just bringing the knight out would have been better and getting ready to castle. Now, this was a 15-minute game, so perhaps Anand wanted to try and create some early threats, make the game more exciting. But Magnus ignores this, any threat that this queen might pose, and immediately plays queen to d4. So we have a knight being developed here, allowing the king to get ready to castle, but this is an inaccuracy. A6 would have been better, which could leave an escape hatch for the bishop or even the knight to reposition, maybe to here and then down to here. And also with A6, you could threaten next to push this pawn forward and attack the bishop. But in the game, Magnus Carlsen finds the best move, and as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to bring the queen out too early where it can become a target here. So now, this is a good tip. If you're able to create threats, like this, by bringing the bishop up and attacking, well, now your opponent is forced to waste time retreating. And when this queen moves, which it does here to the best position, now this just gives Magnus Carlsen time to move another piece or pawn or do something else. So you want to try and avoid that. So he develops a queen. The computer says this is an inaccuracy, but white is ahead at this point anyway. And we have a battery. So a good tip to improve your chess game is try and use batteries when you can. Either a queen bishop battery like this, aiming up here at this vulnerable f pawn, a threat of capture with check, or use rooks and queens or rooks, and you can create batteries where they work together in tandem to attack or even defend as well. So we have castling, a great move. I don't know how great it was. It just brings the king to safety, helps protect this pawn, gets the rook into a better position. All things that you want to do in your own games. All right. Magnus Carlsen plays a mistake here. And black gains a slight edge after this move. Apparently d5 would have been better to chase this knight. And where would the knight go? It would have to retreat to the back rank. Not very good for a knight. You don't want to place your knights on the edge of the board where they have less squares that they can move to. All right, the bishop retreats back and lines up on this diagonal, aiming at the king here. And what does Magnus do? He plays a missed opportunity, apparently. Now the computer recommends capturing on e5, which would grab a pawn, but it would result in a discovered attack on the queen. So a good tip, I would say, is to always look for tactics and ideas of lining up rooks or bishops, your pieces, and creating a threat against a more valuable piece. Even though there's a pawn in between, once that pawn would move, you have a discovered attack here on the queen. So if you can line up your queen, bishops, or rooks, aim them at the more valuable pieces, rooks, queens, king, or even an unprotected piece or pawn. Even if there are pieces in between, pieces or pawns like this, once the position opens up, the opponent could be in trouble here. But Magnus ignored that, brought his knight to the edge of the board, maybe threatening to jump up here and attack the queen. So Anand tries to get an attack in first with knight to a5, targeting Magnus's queen. But e takes d4 apparently would have been better. So now the queen moves to the edge, a4 here, the best move, and white has a slight edge here. So now we have another mistake by Anand, and things are kind of crazy here. So, one strategy you can try, if you're good at tactics and you study your tactics, you can try and create chaotic positions, especially in quick games, and it'll be hard for your opponent to keep track of all the pieces attacking everywhere and crisscrossing, especially if it's an open position. Sometimes it's hard to track all the attacks and the tactics possible, and that could confuse your opponent. So study those tactics, as I've mentioned before. All right, finally there's a capture here, but now that's a miss. It would have been better to move forward and attack the knight. So the queen is under attack. So we have queen to c5 here. A mistake. Queen to g6, lining up on the king would have been better. So Magnus, what does he do? He just brings the rook up into the heart of the position and chases that queen. So another good strategy, a tip is that if you can create threats and attacks where your pieces are moving forward up the board, especially into the center of the board or towards the enemy king even, and attack pieces, and your opponent is forced to run, well, that gives you time to bring in more pieces for the attack. Now here, Anand counterattacks, which is the best move in the position. But if we look at this point, white is ahead by the equivalent of 1.5 pawns, even though Anand at this time is ahead by 1 pawn. So the king is forced into the corner. And now a mistake. Apparently h6 attacking the bishop would have been better. But here, after queen to b2, we have an attack on the queen. And this is where you really have to be careful. If you get that queen into enemy territory and it's really limited on what squares it can move to, there's a chance of trapping the queen. So, try and keep an eye out on that when you're looking at tactics. See if there's an opportunity to trap your opponent's queen when there's limited, or any piece when it's really limited on where it can go. And try and avoid that, of course, for yourself. So, what is best here? It looks like maybe queen to f2, where the queen, is that the only place it can run to? The queen can't go up this file, up the b file, or it'll be captured. The diagonals are not possible. Actually, it almost looks like this pawn could be captured. But then, looks like that would lead to a trap as well. Possibly with the other rook attacking the queen. Or maybe even this bishop attacking. So this queen is just really limited on where it can go. So try to avoid a position like this where your queen is having hardly anywhere to move. In the game, this was played. Queen takes the knight, so giving the queen up and trying to get some material in return in a really crazy position, which we'll see in a minute. But let's look at this other option, queen to f2. What could be played here? Well, it looks like the best thing would be rook to f1 maybe. Rook to f1, is that the best move there? Apparently. And then the queen would be forced. You can't move along this diagonal. The queen would have to go back to here. And then what? Rook to b5. And once again, this pawn can't be captured here because of this bishop possibly trapping the queen. So yeah, the queen is really limited on what it can do. So in the game, the queen is under attack. This is a 15-minute game. Anand is running out of options, so he tries to get some counterplay by grabbing the knight. The queen, so here we have a +5 advantage for Magnus. He's grabbed the queen, but now this bishop can be captured, and Magnus no longer has the bishop pair. His queen's under attack, so it just moves up, counterattacking the knight. And if we look at the position, what do we have here? Magnus has a queen. And as far as pawns, we have 6 pawns versus 7. So Anand has a pawn, a bishop, and a knight. So 7 points of material versus 9 for that queen. So the game continues with the knight jumping. And where could this knight go? It's pretty much trapped here. So if we go back, the knight can't move here, or the pawn grabs it. Can't move here, or knight captures, and then if we have a recapture, the rook would capture and come out ahead. Knight can't go here, or the knight would capture, or here. Now, it looks like knight to a5 would be possible. So I'll take a quick look at that before we look at what was actually played. So either knight looks like it could jump here. All right, so first let's look at this. If that is played, well then it looks like c4 is the best move. Maybe getting ready to try and trap this bishop. And, okay, so one tip. All right, so here we have a counterattack. If you're studying master games, sometimes the modern players, they use computers a lot and they find just some really crazy, complicated lines. And they're at such a high level that it's hard to follow along in some of these games because the tactics and everything get so crazy. And that's why, another tip is if you're going to study master games, especially beginners and intermediate players, start with the older masters. Look at games by Paul Morphy from the 1800s, Steinitz and Lasker, Capablanca, all the old masters from 100 years ago. Because those games are a little less complicated. They're usually not as crazy and hard to understand. All right, so before I drag this out, let's go back a little bit and see what actually happened in the game. So queen gives itself up for the knight, and now a bishop in return. But we have a counterattack on this knight. So the knight jumps forward here where it looks like the bishop can just capture. But instead, Magnus finds the best move, capturing the bishop. Because, all right, here the bishop was guarding. This bishop was guarding the knight. So Magnus captures that. The knight retreats, attacking, but another piece is picked off. And now here Anand resigned because, what can be played here? It looks like the best move is to attack the queen. Then the queen can go to c2. And you'd think you would just want to capture the rook here. But knight to e3 is apparently a little bit better. Interesting. But I don't know. Let's say you capture this. Well, then what? Well, then you're able to capture the knight. And then looks like h6 would be best. But then you have bishop to e7, targeting, rook counterattacks. But then after d6, if this pawn captures, the other pawn captures, and you have a knight or a bishop up here lodged in the heart of black's position. So the recommendation is a5, queen to d2. Oh man, now preparing to push forward, forking pieces, threatening to promote a pawn. So capture, and then rook to a7 to stop that threat. h3 giving the king some breathing room. Bishop to e6. And now queen up to d4 attacking the rook. So the game could have gone on this way, but Magnus would have been in the lead. So, earlier Anand just resigned, it looked like. All right, well, I don't want to drag this video out any longer, but some tips to improve your game. Study those tactics regularly. Play as often as you can and go over as many of your games as you can. First, just try and figure everything out on your own without using a computer. And then you can go over the game with the computer and see what you missed in your own calculations. But yeah, study strategies, study end games, and tactics all around. And then openings, pick a good opening with white, a good opening with black, and maybe don't go too crazy on openings and try and memorize a bunch of lines. If you just try and go one move deeper after each one of your games in whatever opening it is. So let's say you're playing the Evans Gambit and you start out, you know that if you play e4, they play e5, you want to play knight to f3. And now if they play knight to c6, you want the Italian game. Well then, if they play this move, you figure, all right, I know in this position I want to play the Evans Gambit. And now they have different options. So let's say you're not sure what to do here. So if they capture, you're like, all right, if they capture, I know my best move is going to be to follow up with c3 and chase that bishop. And then the bishop has different moves. So in the game, they go back to here. So then you just figure out, let's say you don't know, this is as far as you got. So now you have to figure out where you want to go from here. Do you play d4 immediately, which is a possibility? Or do you castle, which is what Magnus Carlsen did, which is the second best move, but it says that black gains an edge after this. So that's what you have to figure out. Would you be more comfortable picking the second best move, or would you be comfortable in this position where you play the best move, but maybe it's a little more complicated? So things you have to consider when you're learning openings. All right, well, feel free to leave any comments, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. And thank you for watching. Have a super chess day.